I'm Ashley, 31 female. I live in a city that always feels like it's buzzing with other people's dreams, but for the first time, I felt like my own were finally solidifying. As a project manager, my entire life revolves around timelines, budgets, and execution, and I had applied that same meticulous energy to building a perfect life with my fiancé, Mark. In 1 week, all that planning was supposed to culminate in the wedding I had dreamed of since I was a little girl. Little did I know, the biggest project risk wasn't a vendor or a budget overrun. It was the two people I trusted most in the world. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The week before my wedding was supposed to be a blur of joyful chaos. It was the final stretch of a marathon I'd been running for 18 months. Every detail was planned, every contract signed, every seating chart triple-checked. Our apartment, which Mark and I had shared for 3 years, was an obstacle course of wedding favors, welcome baskets for out-of-town guests, and boxes containing my carefully preserved dress. The air should have been thick with anticipation. Instead, a strange, quiet tension had settled in, a low hum of dissonance beneath the surface of our meticulously crafted life. I told myself it was just pre-wedding jitters, a normal reaction to such a monumental life event. Mark was quieter than usual. He attributed it to stress from work. As a real estate agent, his income was commission-based, and he often complained about the pressures of closing deals. "Just a tough market, Ash," he'd say, running a hand through his sandy brown hair. "It'll all be fine after the wedding. We can finally relax." I'd accepted it, wanting to be the supportive, understanding partner. I'd rub his shoulders, make his favorite dinner, and steer the conversation back to our honeymoon in Italy, the sun-drenched Amalfi Coast, the historic streets of Rome. His eyes would light up for a moment, the familiar spark returning, and I'd feel reassured. Everything was fine. My best friend, Chloe, was my maid of honor. We'd been inseparable since kindergarten, a friendship that had weathered every storm of adolescence and early adulthood. She was the yin to my yang. Where I was structured and pragmatic, she was free-spirited and intuitive. As a yoga instructor, she projected an aura of serene calm that I often relied on. She had been instrumental in the wedding planning, offering opinions on flower arrangements and tasting cakes with a level of enthusiasm that nearly matched my own. But lately, she too seemed distant. Our daily check-in calls became shorter, her responses more vague. When I'd asked if everything was okay, she'd blamed it on a new workshop she was developing. "It's just so draining, Ash. All this creative energy," she'd explained in her soft, breathy voice. "I'll be back to my old self once you're a married woman." I remember standing in our living room just 7 days before the wedding, looking at a framed photo of the three of us from college graduation. Me, Mark, and Chloe, arms slung around each other, beaming at the camera, full of naive optimism about the future. We were a unit, a tripod of friendship and love that felt unbreakable. We'd navigated so much together, my father's illness, Mark's early career struggles, Chloe's string of failed relationships. They were my people, the foundation upon which I was building my future. The centerpiece of that future was our venue, the Blackwood Estate. It wasn't just a place, it was a dream. A historic manor nestled on 100 acres of rolling hills, with ancient oak trees and a pristine lake that reflected the sky like a mirror. It was astronomically expensive and notoriously difficult to book, with a waiting list years long. We'd only secured it through a stroke of luck and my relentless persistence. The deposits alone were staggering, a significant portion of my life savings. Mark's contribution to the wedding fund had been modest. He was still building his client base, he'd said. I didn't mind. I was the planner, the one with the stable income and the detailed financial spreadsheets. I saw it as an investment in our shared future. Every payment, every contract, was a brick in the foundation of the life we were building. And I, the diligent project manager, had made sure every single one of those foundational documents was secure. On that evening, a week before the wedding, Mark came home with a single white rose. He handed it to me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. For my beautiful bride-to-be, he said. Can you believe it? 1 week. I buried my face in the rose, inhaling its sweet, clean scent and pushed my anxieties away. It was just stress. We were fine. We were perfect. In 7 days, I would walk down an aisle to ward him, with Chloe by my side, at the venue of our dreams. My meticulously planned life was right on schedule. The illusion of our perfect life shattered 2 days later. It happened on a Tuesday, 5 days before the wedding. The day had started normally. I spent the morning on the phone with the caterer, confirming the final head count and discussing a minor adjustment to the menu. My cousin Sarah, a nurse with a heart of gold and a no-nonsense attitude, texted me a picture of her bridesmaid dress, perfectly tailored. Ready to watch you walk the aisle, cousin? Can't wait. My heart swelled with affection. The pieces were all falling into place. Mark had texted me at noon. Need to talk tonight. Something important. A chill snaked down my spine, cold and immediate. His words were clinical, devoid of the usual pet names or casual warmth. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe he'd secured a huge commission and wanted to surprise me. Maybe his parents, who were flying in the next day, had decided to contribute a large sum to our honeymoon fund. I was a project manager. I was trained to assess situations logically, not to jump to the worst-case scenario. But my intuition, long suppressed by checklists and timelines, was screaming at me. That evening, the apartment felt unnervingly still. Mark was sitting on the sofa, not watching TV or scrolling through his phone, but just staring at the polished hardwood floor. He looked up as I walked in, and his face was a mask of pale, grim resolution. I knew, in that instant, that my life was about to be irrevocably broken into a before and an after. "What's wrong, Mark?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I kept my distance, standing by the doorway, my work tote still slung over my shoulder. He took a deep breath, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. "There's no easy way to say this, Ashley." He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was looking at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. "I can't marry you." The words didn't compute at first. They were just sounds, hanging in the air between us, meaningless. I felt a strange, detached curiosity. "What are you talking about? The wedding is in 5 days. My parents are on a plane. Your parents land tomorrow." I listed the facts, the scheduled events, as if my precious timeline could somehow override his statement. "I know the timing is terrible," he mumbled, finally looking at me. There was no sadness in his eyes, no regret. There was only a weary sort of impatience, as if he just wanted to get this unpleasant task over with. But it would be worse to go through with it, knowing what I know now. "Knowing what?" My voice cracked. The floor felt like it was tilting beneath my feet. He hesitated, then seemed to steel himself. "I'm in love with someone else." It was a classic, brutal line from a movie, something that happens to other people. Not to me, not to Ashley, the planner, the one who had all the contingencies figured out. A wave of nausea washed over me. "Someone else?" I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "Who? How long?" He stood up then, as if sitting was too passive for the final blow. He walked towards the window, looking out at the city lights. "It doesn't matter how long. What matters is that it's real. It's not just comfortable and planned like us. It's everything." The mention of our life being merely planned was a deliberate twist of the knife. He was using my greatest strength, my defining quality, as a weapon against me. And then, the final, unthinkable piece of the puzzle clicked into place. My mind flashed back to Chloe's recent distance, her vague excuses, the way she'd avoided my gaze the last time we'd met for coffee. The way her name had come up just a little too often in Mark's stories about his day. No, it couldn't be. "Who is it, Mark?" I demanded, my voice raw with a dawning horror. Just then there was a soft knock on the apartment door. Mark flinched, then walked over and opened it. And there she was, Chloe, my best friend, my maid of honor. She was dressed in yoga pants and a simple tank top, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked serene, as always, but her eyes darted to me, then quickly away. She was carrying a small overnight bag. Mark didn't say anything, he just gestured toward her. "Her," he said, his voice flat. "I'm leaving you for her." The air left my lungs. The entire world narrowed to the sight of them standing there, in the doorway of the life I had so carefully built. My fiancé and my best friend. Chloe finally looked at me, her expression not one of shame or remorse, but of pity. It was the pity that broke me. "I'm so sorry, Ash," she whispered, her voice laced with that infuriating, gentle calm. "We didn't want to hurt you. We just couldn't fight this anymore." They stood there together, a united front against me in my own home. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound, it felt like a physical impact. I looked from his face to hers, arching for any sign of the people I thought I knew. I found none. They were strangers. My project manager brain, the part of me that always functioned in a crisis, took over. It sifted through the emotional wreckage and found a single, actionable task. My hands began to shake, but my movements were precise. I reached up and twisted the diamond ring off my finger. It felt strangely light. For 2 years it had felt like a part of me, and now it was just a piece of metal and carbon. I walked toward them, my steps steady. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I held the ring out to Mark, my palm flat. He looked at it, then at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Here," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I believe this belongs to you." He took it, his fingers brushing against mine. The brief contact felt like a jolt of electricity. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. I looked at both of them, standing there, ready to start their new life on the ashes of mine. And in that moment of absolute devastation, a single cold thought cut through the pain. The Blackwood estate, the deposits, the contracts. A small, dark smile touched my lips, a fleeting expression that they were too wrapped up in their own drama to notice. They thought they had taken everything. They had no idea what they had just left behind. The hours after they left were a hollow, echoing void. Chloe had the audacity to say, "We'll just get our things later to make it easier on you," as if their convenience was the primary concern. Mark just nodded, took her hand, and they walked out, leaving the door slightly ajar behind them. For a long time, I just stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the ghosts of a future that had just been executed. The wedding favors in their little organza bags seemed to be mocking me. The seating chart, with Mark and Ashley in elegant script at the head table, was a monument to my own foolishness. My first instinct was to shatter something, to hurl a stack of plates against the wall or sweep the welcome baskets off the table. But I didn't. The project manager in me, the part of my brain that thrived on order and control, refused to cede ground to the chaos. Instead, I sank onto the sofa, the same spot where Mark had delivered his verdict, and I let the first wave of pain wash over me. It was a physical sensation, a crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. The betrayal from Mark was a sharp, deep cut, but the betrayal from Chloe, that was a different kind of wound. It was a slow-acting poison that spread through 25 years of shared memories, tainting every single one. Every secret whispered late at night, every shoulder cried on, every shared laugh, it was all contaminated. After an hour, or maybe it was 3, I finally moved. My body felt like it was filled with lead, but I forced myself up. My first call was not to my parents, who were blissfully unaware in the air somewhere over the Atlantic. It was not to my friends, who would soon have to be told that the wedding they had booked flights for was canceled. My first call was to my cousin, Sarah. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, is everything okay? You sound weird." Tears I didn't know I had been holding back finally started to fall. Through choked sobs, I managed to get the story out. "Mark, Chloe, he's leaving me for her." The words felt just as ugly saying them aloud as they did hearing them. Sarah was silent for a moment, and I could picture her on the other end, her nurse's mind processing the trauma, triaging the situation. There was no cascade of useless questions or platitudes. When she spoke, her voice was firm. "Where are you?" "Home, my apartment." "Okay, I'm on my way. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't call anyone else. Don't post anything. Don't answer the door if they come back. Just sit tight. I'm coming." Her decisiveness was an anchor in my swirling storm of grief. While I waited, another part of my brain began to stir. the part that handled logistics, details, and fine print. I walked numbly to my home office, a small room where I had spent countless hours planning the wedding. On my desk, under a neat stack of vendor folders, was the master binder. The wedding Bible, as I had jokingly called it. I opened it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the pages. I flipped past the caterer, the florist, the photographer, until I reached the most important section, the Blackwood estate. I pulled out the main contract, a thick sheaf of papers filled with intimidating legal jargon. I had read it a dozen times before signing. I knew its clauses by heart. Mark had been there when we'd toured the venue. He had loved it, calling it epic and the perfect backdrop for our story. But when it came time for the paperwork and the substantial initial deposit, he had been conveniently busy with a client. "You handle it, Ash," he'd said with a casual wave of his hand. "You're the expert. Just put it on your card and I'll pay you back for my half." I had, of course, handled it. I had paid the entire $50,000 non-refundable deposit from my own savings account. I had meticulously filled out every line of the contract. And in the space that asked for the contracting party's name, I had made a split-second decision. My pen had hovered for a moment over the line. I could have written Mark and Ashley. It would have been the romantic, symbolic thing to do. But the project manager in me, the one who always plans for risk, had won. What if something happened? What if one of us lost a job? It was just cleaner, safer to have a single point of contact, a single legal entity responsible. I had written my name and my name alone. I had signed it. The venue manager, a crisp professional named Mrs. Gable, had countersigned it. Mark's name did not appear anywhere on that document. Not once. I ran my finger over my signature. At the time, it had been a simple act of pragmatic organization. Now, it felt like a lifeline. I pulled up the payment confirmations on my laptop. The initial deposit, the second installment paid 6 months ago, and the third paid just last month. A total of $150,000, all from my accounts. All non-refundable. All tied to a contract held solely in my name. When Sarah arrived, she found me sitting at my desk, the contract spread out before me, a strange, grim calm having settled over me. The tears had stopped. She took one look at my face and then at the papers. "That's the venue, isn't it?" she asked softly. I nodded. "They think they can just walk away," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "They think the biggest consequence is a canceled party and some awkward phone calls." Sarah pulled up a chair beside me. She didn't touch me. She just sat there, a solid, comforting presence. "What does the contract say?" "It says that I, Ashley Peterson, have rented the Blackwood estate for this coming Saturday," I said, a slow, cold anger beginning to replace the pain. "It says all payments are final and non-refundable. It says the booking is non-transferable without the express written consent of both myself and the venue management." I looked at her, and for the first time in hours, I saw a path forward. It wasn't a path to reconciliation or immediate happiness. It was a path paved with the fine print of a well-executed contract. "They want a future together?" I said, my voice hardening. "Fine, but they're not getting the one we planned. They're not getting our dream venue, because it was never our dream venue. It was mine. I bought it. I paid for it. And I am the only one who controls it." The cold comfort of that legal document was the first solid thing I had to hold onto in the wreckage of my life. The next 2 days were a masterclass in emotional compartmentalization. By day, I was the grieving victim. With Sarah as my rock, I made the necessary, excruciating phone calls. First, to my parents, catching them just as they checked into their hotel. My mother's gasp of horror, my father's quiet, simmering rage on my behalf, it was both validating and heart-wrenching. I asked them to tell the rest of the family. I couldn't bear to repeat the story over and over again. Then, I sent a carefully worded email to our 200 guests. Due to unforeseen circumstances, the wedding of Ashley Peterson and Mark Gable on date will not be taking place. We apologize for any inconvenience this may cause. It was sterile, professional, and gave away nothing. Each call, each email was a fresh stab of humiliation. But with each one, a layer of grief was scraped away, replaced by something harder and more resilient. The nights were a different story. In the lonely quiet of the apartment, the pain would return, sharp and visceral. I would see Chloe's face, her look of serene pity, and feel the betrayal all over again. I'd think of Mark's casual cruelty and wonder if I had ever truly known him at all. How long had this been going on? Was our entire relationship a lie? These questions were a venomous spiral, and I knew if I let them, they would consume me. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I started a new project. Project Deconstruction. My objective was to understand the truth, not for closure, but for clarity. My logical mind needed data. I wasn't a spy, but I was a damn good researcher. I started with social media, the modern-day trail of breadcrumbs for the deceitful. Mark and Chloe were smart. Their public profiles were clean. No tagged photos together, no revealing comments. They had clearly been careful, but people are never as careful as they think they are. I went deeper, looking at the profiles of their friends and their friends of friends. I looked at Chloe's yoga studio page. She posted about a weekend yoga retreat in the mountains about 6 months ago. Finding our center and connecting with nature, the caption read. A few of her students had posted photos from the trip. In the background of one of them, almost lost in the crowd of people doing a warrior pose, was a man in a familiar gray hoodie. Mark. He had told me he was on a boys' fishing trip that weekend. He'd even sent me a picture of a trout. A picture, I now realized, he had probably pulled from the internet. The discovery sent a jolt of ice-cold fury through me. It wasn't a recent fling. It had been going on for at least half a year. They had been lying to my face, living a double life, while I was meticulously planning our shared future. Every late night at the office for him, every draining workshop for her, it was all a lie. I felt like a fool, but the anger was a powerful antidote to the shame. My cousin Sarah, with her nurse's talent for gathering information discreetly, was my co-conspirator. You'd be surprised what people talk about when they think you're just the quiet person in the room, she said. She was friends with a woman who worked at the real estate agency where Mark was employed. Without revealing the whole story, Sarah simply mentioned that my wedding was off and that I was devastated. Her friend's response was immediate and illuminating. Oh, honey, I'm not surprised. The way he and that blonde yoga instructor were acting at the company holiday party, it was a scandal waiting to happen. According to her friend, Mark and Chloe had spent the entire night in a corner, whispering and laughing. They'd left together long before the party ended. This was in December, 2 months after we got engaged. They had started their affair almost immediately after he had put a ring on my finger. The ring he had taken back so casually. The timeline of their deceit was horrifying. They had let me plan, pay for, and dream about a wedding for a year, all while they were together behind my back. They had looked me in the eye, day after day, and lied. Chloe had helped me choose my wedding dress, for God's sake. She had cried when I'd walked out of the dressing room, telling me I was the most beautiful bride she had ever seen. The memory now made me physically ill. She hadn't been crying for me. She had probably been crying for herself, caught in her own web of lies. The final piece of information came from an unexpected source. One of the wedding vendors, the florist, called me to offer her condolences. She was a kind, motherly woman who had gushed about how in love Mark and I had seemed during our consultation. After I confirmed the cancellation, she hesitated. Dear, she said, her voice soft, I don't want to be a gossip, but I feel you should know. A woman called my shop yesterday. She wanted to know if the floral arrangements for your wedding, the specific roses and lilies you chose, could be transferred to a new booking, for the same venue, on the same day. My blood ran cold. What was her name? I asked, already knowing the answer. She said her name was Chloe, the florist replied. She said she was a close friend taking over the arrangements for you. It felt strange, so I told her I would have to speak with you first, as you are the client on record. So that was their plan. They weren't just going to steal my fiancé and my best friend. They were going to steal my wedding. They thought they could just step into the life I had built, into the very day I had planned, and make it their own. The audacity of it was breathtaking. They weren't just ending our relationship. They were trying to erase me from my own story and replace the protagonist. They assumed I would crumble, that I would be too heartbroken to fight back. They assumed the money was just gone, a casualty of the breakup. They had no idea about the one thing I held over them, the power of that contract. The trail of lies and whispers had led me right to their intentions, and now I knew exactly what I needed to do. The project manager in me had all the data she needed. It was time to move on to the next phase, execution. A week after the breakup, they finally reached out. I had been living in a fortress of solitude and supportive texts from Sarah. Mark and Chloe had cleared out their belongings one afternoon while I was out, leaving my key on the kitchen counter, a final, impersonal act of severance. I had spent that evening cleansing the apartment, packing away every photo, every gift, every trace of them. It was a painful but necessary ritual. My grief was slowly calcifying into a cold, hard resolve. The email arrived on a Wednesday morning. It was from Mark, but the language had Chloe's fingerprints all over it, full of therapeutic jargon and feigned empathy. Subject moving forward. Ashley, I hope you are beginning to heal. Chloe and I know how much pain we've caused, and we are truly sorry for the way things happened. It was never our intention to be so abrupt, but we believe in living our authentic truth, and we couldn't continue a lie. I snorted. Their authentic truth was a half-year-long affair. We know the wedding cancellation has created a lot of logistical and financial complications. The loss of the deposits, especially for the venue, is a terrible blow. Chloe and I have been talking, and we want to help mitigate some of that loss for you. We feel it's the least we can do. Here is our proposal. We would like to take over the booking for the Blackwood estate. We know it's a long shot, but we were thinking, since the date is already booked and the deposits are non-refundable, maybe the venue would be willing to transfer the event to us. We would, of course, reimburse you for a portion of the deposits you've paid. We can't afford the full amount right now, but we can offer you $25,000. We know it's not everything you paid, but it's something, and it would allow the beautiful wedding you plan to still happen, just in a different way. It feels like the most positive outcome for everyone. Let us know if you're willing to speak to the venue on our behalf. Again, we are so sorry, and we truly wish you the best. Mark. I read the email 3 times. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was almost impressive. They weren't just asking for the venue, they were framing it as a favor to me, a generous offer to mitigate my loss. They wanted to buy my dream, the one I had funded and created, for pennies on the dollar. They wanted me to make the call, to smooth the way for them, to gracefully hand over the keys to the castle I had built. They had underestimated me so profoundly it was almost comical. They saw me as the heartbroken, naive girl they had betrayed, not the meticulous project manager who held all the cards. My first impulse was to write back a scathing, furious reply, but that wasn't the plan. The plan was not to be emotional. The plan was to be professional. This was a negotiation, and they had just made the opening offer. I forwarded the email to Sarah with the message, "Phase 2 is a go." She replied almost instantly, "Burn it all down, metaphorically, of course, you're a nurse after all." I took a deep breath and began to type my response. I adopted a tone of weary resignation, of someone too broken to fight. Subject, Ray, moving forward. Mark, thank you for your email. This has been an incredibly difficult time, and frankly, I am not in a position to handle any more conflict. The financial loss is devastating. Your offer is unexpected. I'm not sure the venue would even allow a transfer. The contract was very strict, but I suppose it's better than losing everything. Before I even consider contacting them, I would need to see the $25,000. I can't expend any more emotional energy on this without a firm commitment from you. Please transfer the funds to my account. If you do that, I will call Mrs. Gable at the estate and see what is possible. Ashley. It was a calculated risk. I was dangling the bait, the possibility that they could get everything they wanted. The request for the money up front was the hook. It would test how desperate they were. If they paid, it was a non-refundable down payment on their own destruction. I hit send and felt a tremor of adrenaline. For the next 24 hours, I was on edge. Had I overplayed my hand? Would they see through it? The following afternoon, I received a notification from my bank. Incoming wire transfer, 25,000. They had paid. They were so blinded by their own selfish desires, so confident in my weakness, that they had actually paid. They thought they were buying a venue. What they had really bought was a front row seat to their own public humiliation. I took another deep breath and drafted the second email. This was the crucial part. I had to make them believe they were in control, that they were winning. Subject: update on the venue. Mark. I received the funds. Thank you, it does help. I spoke with Mrs. Gable at the Blackwood estate. It was a difficult conversation. As I suspected, the contract is ironclad and in my name only. She said a transfer is highly irregular and not technically permitted. However, after I explained the painful circumstances, she softened a little. She said that while she cannot officially transfer the contract, she is willing to work with a designated event coordinator of my choosing. She said that as long as I, the contracting client, am happy, she will allow my designated coordinator to manage the event on the scheduled day. She will need to speak with your new planner to go over the details. So, it seems possible. You can have your wedding at the estate on Saturday. You and Chloe can just hire your own planner, and I will sign a document authorizing them to act on my behalf for the day. This is all I can do. It's the last thing. After this, I need you to promise you will not contact me again. This is my closure. Ashley. Every word was a carefully crafted lie woven around a kernel of truth. The contract was ironclad, but I hadn't spoken to Mrs. Gable. I didn't need to. I was the client. IW. As in charge, I was giving them the green light, making them believe the path was clear. They would now rush forward, hiring vendors, sending out invitations for their wedding at their dream venue. They would be so busy planning their stolen triumph they wouldn't see the fine print. And the fine print was simple. I was still the sole legal owner of the event, and I had a very different plan for Saturday. The offer had been made, and the trap had been sprung. The next few days passed in a strange, surreal calm. I imagined Mark and Chloe in a frenzy of last-minute planning, high on their apparent victory. They would be calling caterers, booking a new photographer, and telling their friends the amazing news about how they managed to salvage the perfect venue. They were building the stage for their own downfall, and I was letting them do it. I instructed the original florist, photographer, and band, all of whom were contracted under my name, to await my final confirmation, telling them there had been a change of plans, but the event was still proceeding. They were loyal to me as the paying client and agreed to wait for my signal. My own preparations were quiet and meticulous. The day before the wedding, I drove to the Blackwood estate. I had scheduled a meeting with Mrs. Gable, the venue manager. She was an elegant woman in her 60s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. I had emailed her briefly, stating that there had been a significant change in my personal circumstances and I needed to discuss the arrangements for the event on Saturday. We sat in her stately office overlooking the lake. I laid it all out for her: the affair, the betrayal, their scheme to take over the venue. I showed her their email and my carefully worded replies. As I spoke, her professional neutrality softened into a look of steely empathy. "So, to be clear, Ms. Peterson," she said when I finished, her voice crisp, "you remain the sole contracting client for tomorrow's event. Mr. Gable and his partner have no legal standing here whatsoever." "That is correct," I confirmed. "And they believe they are hosting their wedding here tomorrow." "They do. They've likely sent out invitations to their own guests." A slow smile spread across Mrs. Gable's face. "In 20 years of managing this estate," she said, "I have seen a lot of drama, but this is exquisite. What do you need from us?" "I need you and your staff to treat me, and only me, as the host of tomorrow's event. I have a new guest list. I have a new purpose for the day. I am not canceling the party. I am rebranding it." Her smile widened. "Consider it done, Ms. Peterson. The Blackwood estate is at your service." Saturday arrived, the day that was supposed to be my wedding day. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. I didn't feel sad. I felt a powerful, humming clarity. Sarah was with me, a beacon of calm support. We didn't dress in mourning clothes. I wore a stunning, emerald green cocktail dress, a color that symbolized renewal and, in my opinion, money. We arrived at the estate 2 hours before the event was scheduled to start. The place was breathtaking. The floral arrangements I had chosen were everywhere. The string lights were twinkling in the ancient oaks, and the band was setting up by the dance floor. It was the perfect wedding scene, but it wasn't a wedding. At 4:00 p.m., guests began to arrive. There were 2 distinct groups. First came my guests, my parents, my brother, Sarah, and about 30 of my closest friends and family, whom I had personally called and invited to a celebration of new beginnings. They were dressed for a party and knew exactly what was happening. They greeted me with fierce hugs and looks of proud support. Then the other guests started to trickle in. Mark and Chloe's friends and family, dressed in their wedding finery, looking confused. They milled about awkwardly, clutching wedding gifts, whispering to each other. I saw Mark's parents looking around for him, a worried frown on his mother's face. At 4:30 p.m., right on schedule, a white limousine pulled up the long, gravel driveway. Out stepped Chloe, beaming in a flowing, bohemian-style wedding dress. She looked radiant. Following her was Mark, looking smug and triumphant in a tailored blue suit. They paused at the entrance to the main lawn, ready to make their grand entrance to their wedding. They saw the crowd, saw me standing near the front, and their smiles faltered. This wasn't the scene they had envisioned. Where was their efficient? Why were all my friends and family there, looking so cheerful? As they began to walk hesitantly toward the lawn, my voice cut through the air, amplified by the microphone the band had set up for me. "Welcome, everyone," I said, my voice bright and strong. "Thank you all for coming. I know there might be some confusion, so let me clear it up. You were all invited here today for a wedding, and you have come to the right place. Just not one you were expecting." Mark and Chloe froze, their faces draining of color. All eyes were on them. "You see," I continued, walking slowly toward them, "I booked and paid for this beautiful venue. I paid for the flowers, the food, and the music. It was meant to be for my wedding to Mark. But, as some of you know, Mark decided to end our engagement to be with my former best friend, Chloe." I gestured to Chloe, who looked like she might faint. Her serene yoga facade had completely crumbled. They were so eager to start their life together that they offered to buy this wedding for me to lessen my financial burden. They even made a down payment. I smiled brightly. A very generous $25,000. But what they failed to understand is that you can't buy something that isn't for sale. This event was, and remains, legally mine. I stopped a few feet from them. Mark's face was a mottled shade of red and white. "So," I announced to the assembled crowd, "I decided not to cancel. Instead, I've decided to host a celebration. A party to celebrate honesty, integrity, and new beginnings. A party to celebrate cutting toxic people out of your life. It's my I dodged a bullet party." A wave of laughter and applause erupted from my friends and family. Mark and Chloe's guests looked horrified, glancing at each other, starting to back away. I turned my attention directly to the disgraced couple. "Mark, Chloe, this is not your wedding. This is my party. You are not welcome here. However, I am a diligent project manager, and every project must end with a final invoice." From a table nearby, Sarah handed me a large, beautifully printed invoice. I held it up for all to see before handing it to Mark. "This is an itemized bill," I said, my voice dropping to a cool, business-like tone. "It's for the remainder of the venue fee, the catering for 200 guests, the full florist bill, the band, the photographer you tried to steal, and an additional charge for emotional damages and attempted wedding theft. After deducting your $25,000 down payment, you owe me a total of $217,450. I don't expect you'll pay it. This is just for your records. A receipt for what you tried to take. Mark stared at the paper in his hand as if it were on fire. Chloe had started to cry, not quiet, pretty tears, but ugly, gulping sobs. Now, I said, turning my back on them and addressing the crowd again with a brilliant smile. Who wants champagne? The bar is open, the music is about to start, and there is absolutely no wedding today. Cheers to that. The cheer that went up from my side of the crowd was deafening. As the band struck up a lively, upbeat song, Mrs. Gable and two of her security staff politely but firmly escorted a speechless Mark and a sobbing Chloe back to their limousine. The final invoice had been delivered. My project was complete. The party that followed was one of the most liberating experiences of my life. Once Mark and Chloe were gone, the cloud of tension evaporated, replaced by an atmosphere of pure, unadulterated joy. Their guests, after a few moments of stunned, awkward silence, quietly dispersed, leaving behind a small mountain of wedding gifts near the entrance. Mrs. Gable assured me her staff would handle them. Perhaps a donation to a local charity? She suggested with a wink. I agreed instantly. My friends and family rallied around me with a ferocity that was deeply moving. My father, a man of few words, gave a toast. He didn't mention the drama. He just raised his glass and said, "To my daughter, Ashley, the strongest person I know. She turns lemons into champagne." My cousin Sarah organized an impromptu dance-off. We feasted on the exquisite food I had so carefully selected months ago, and we danced under the stars to the music of a band I had hired to celebrate a love that turned out to be a lie. But the celebration was real. It wasn't bitter or vengeful, it was triumphant. It was the reclamation of my joy, my money, and my story. As the night wound down, I found myself standing by the lake, looking at the reflection of the moon on the water. The anger that had fueled me for the past week was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. I hadn't just gotten revenge, I had refused to be a victim. I had taken a situation designed to shatter me and used it to demonstrate my own strength. The aftermath in the following weeks was a cascade of digital whispers and real-world consequences for Mark and Chloe. Their attempt to hijack my wedding became the stuff of local legend. Friends they had invited, horrified by what they had witnessed, cut ties with them. The story of their humiliation spread through their social circles and, thanks to the disgruntled real estate colleague, through Mark's workplace. He lost several clients who were uncomfortable working with someone embroiled in such a public scandal. His reputation as a charming, trustworthy agent was shattered. Chloe's yoga studio also took a hit. The persona of a serene, enlightened wellness guide was hard to maintain when people knew you had engaged in a long-term affair with your best friend's fiancé and then tried to steal her wedding. Her class numbers dwindled as clients sought out instructors whose authentic truth wasn't quite so destructive. They never tried to contact me again. The final invoice was, as I had intended, a symbolic gesture, but it served its purpose. A few months later, I heard through the grapevine that they had moved to a different city, hoping to escape the fallout and start over. I felt nothing at their departure, no satisfaction, no pity, just a quiet indifference. They were a closed chapter, a completed project filed away. As for me, the party was just the beginning of my own new start. I sold the apartment that held so many tainted memories and moved into a new place downtown, a space that was entirely my own. I poured my energy into my career, taking on bigger and more challenging projects, and found a deep satisfaction in my own competence and independence. About a year after my I dodged a bullet party, I finally took that trip to Italy. I didn't go to the Amalfi Coast or Rome. Instead, I went to Florence, a city of art, history, and resilience. I went alone. I spent my days wandering through museums, eating gelato in sun-drenched piazzas, and learning to be happy in my own company. One evening, I was sitting at a small cafe, sketching in a notebook, when a man at the next table commented on my drawing. He was an architect from Australia, traveling through Europe. His name was Ben. He had a kind smile and eyes that held a genuine warmth. We started talking, and the conversation flowed as easily as the local wine. There was no pretense, no agenda. It was just easy. We spent the next 3 days exploring the city together. He told me about the buildings he dreamed of designing, and I told him about the projects I was proud of managing. I even told him, in a condensed and slightly funnier version, the story of my non-wedding. He didn't look at me with pity. He just laughed and said, "Good for you. A woman who knows how to manage a crisis is a woman to be admired." When it was time for me to leave Florence, we exchanged numbers with no promises or expectations, but we kept in touch. A few months later, he came to visit me. Then I visited him in Sydney. Our relationship wasn't a whirlwind romance or a meticulously planned project. It was a slow build, based on mutual respect, shared laughter, and a simple, comfortable truth. I learned that true strength isn't about having a perfect plan. It's about how you adapt when the plan falls apart. My life today isn't the one I had scheduled in my binder, and I am endlessly grateful for that. I found a love I didn't have to manage, with a partner who valued my strength instead of feeling threatened by it. I had faced the ultimate betrayal and walked through the fire, not just emerging unscathed, but emerging stronger, brighter, and freer than before. I had watched the sunrise from a different shore, and the view was more beautiful than anything I could have ever planned.